I opened it and found the pocket knife I had given Jacob on his 12th birthday, the bone handle worn smooth by a boy who had carved his name in every old fence post we owned, because he believed the world only remembered what you carved into it. I sat back on my heels and let the past unspool. The attic heard me and did not judge. Jacob at 5 mud to his knees, his hair a choir of cowlicks, trying to carry 3 chicks at once in his pockets. Jacob at 12 shoulders, not yet sure if they could hold him, asking me if a man can inherit a temper or if he has to earn it. Jacob at 17, eyes too bright, mouth too quick, standing in this very place with a box of his things and a fury I had stoked, telling me he was leaving in the morning because his father knew how to plow but not how to listen. The argument had been a fire built from dry years. I had lit it. He had walked into it. Neither of us came out whole back then. I said words that arrived like nails, the kind you can't pull out without tearing the wood. I didn't say, I'm afraid you'll make my mistakes. I said, get out if you know everything. The next day he was gone. 20 years is long enough for an apology to calcify into a stone you carry in your chest and call character. A soft sound broke the attic's attention, not the house settling. A footstep on the first stair, as cautious as a fox. I snuffed the lamp with wet fingers and listened. Another step, my name, spoken just above a whisper, broke itself on the plaster. Pa. The air left my lungs too fast. Something hot and stupid flooded my eyes. I stood, hand out against the roof beam, because my knees had decided not to vote with the rest of me. Jacob. The name felt like a door being forced after rust. I moved toward the stairs and saw a shadow blossom on the wall below. Don't, the voice said. Not yet. I just wanted to see if you were here. Where else would I be? I said, but the gruffness was an old coat that didn't fit anymore. Come up if you're coming at all. Silence. Then the sound retreated 1, 2, 3 steps until it was the house again, and not a man on the stairs. The word coward rose in my throat. Old habits. Old sins. I swallowed it. Every time I had named him something, he had grown into it just to prove me right. I would not lay any name on him today. I lifted the lamp again and relit it. The flame wobbled and found itself. The room stepped back into view. Trunks, dust, papers. The old green rocking horse we had bought at auction when money had allowed for mistakes. I set the knife in my pocket, the ledger on the trunk, and the bundle of letters in my lap. Ruth's ribbon resisted, then let go. Her handwriting greeted me steady, careful, the way she had approached everything difficult. Elijah, if you are reading this without me, fold the laundry, and don't throw away the letters, even when they make your throat burn. I laughed, despite myself. A sound that felt like a man testing his own voice after an illness. The top letter was addressed to Jacob. I did not open it. Some doors you knock on with both hands and still don't deserve to enter. Instead, I read one she had written to herself and never sent anywhere. Today he called his father stubborn. I told him stubbornness is just a fence around something you're afraid to lose. He asked me what his father was afraid of. I said, you, and loving you wrong. I pressed the paper to my chest. The attic allowed me that mercy. By noon the rain had given up pretending and turned to mist. The light was the kind that blesses everything it touches without asking permission. I carried the letters downstairs, made more tea worth less than the water, and sat by the kitchen door, because that was where Ruth used to sit, to snap beans and conduct the weather. The fields held their breath. A hawk trailed a lazy circle above the locust tree by the barn. My sons would call what I did next waiting. Ruth would have called it keeping. I kept the door propped with a brick and kept my ears open for what the quiet might return. I must have dozed. The body will have its ration of sleep no matter who's knocking on your life. I woke to the unmistakable sound of the pump handle creaking behind the house. 2 pulls. Pause. 2 pulls. That rhythm belonged to boys small, impatient, wanting to see the water hurry, because they wanted everything to. I stood, knocking my knee against the table, hard enough to curse, and opened the back door, in time to see the pump handle sigh into stillness. No one at the trough. The earth by the pump was a map of rain. On it, a shoe print, the heel worn on the left side. My breath jammed in my throat. I followed the prints along the flagstones to the barn. The big doors were open, a hand's width. Inside, the smell hit like memory-made air. Hay oil, old leather, dust, the sweet rot of apples left in a forgotten crate. The light came in foreign through the high windows, turning motes to gilt. I stood a moment with my hand on the old sliding door, and felt the barn notice me. The way a dog raises its head when its master's boots find the porch. Jacob, I said. Not loud, not soft. The barn ate the word, and burped dust. The tackroom door was ajar. In the half-dark, I saw the outline of the blue denim jacket that had hung there since my boys were lean and dumb. The jacket was missing. I left you a thing, a voice said from nowhere and everywhere. I turned so fast my hip complained. No one. The voice had been in my head there at the back of all the other voices. I pressed my hand to the wall, closed my eyes, and let the barn talk in its own way. A memory came up like a fish. Jacob at 10, insisting we weigh the kittens, because he wanted to see if love could be measured. Jacob at 14, practicing his apology in the hayloft, and then losing it on the way to the kitchen. Jacob at 17, flinging a bale like it was the argument itself, and he could throw it far enough to end it. Behind the tack room door, on the nail where Ruth had hung a calendar that was an optimist every year, a new envelope had been tacked, damp around the edges. My name on the front in a hand that made my bones remember how I had learned my own letters by watching him shape his. I took it down with 2 fingers, as if it might break if I breathed on it too hard. "Pa," it began. And I had to sit on the grain bin before I could go on. "I don't know if this will find you or if the barn will just keep it the way it keeps everything I dropped when I should have held on. I came by a while back. I knocked. You didn't come. I figured you were sleeping or were madder than the last time we saw each other. I've tried a dozen times to say what's simple." The ink hiccuped there, a smudge where a hand had paused too long. "I left because I wanted to be right. Then I stayed gone, because I didn't know how to be wrong. I got good at building other lives and bad at keeping the one I was born to. I don't have much to show but a spine that hurts when it rains, and a boy who can make a fire in the rain anyway. He asked me once what you were like. I said you were like the barn. Strong, stubborn, and always there even when I chose the road. If you read this, I'll try again tonight. Midnight. I know you're a man who likes a number he can trust. J. I read it twice, then 3 times. My first thought was not noble. Why bring a boy into this story? The second was worse. Midnight, again. The third was a prayer that didn't know where to point itself. The afternoon lurched forward, a slow animal dragging one leg. I split the last of the kindling and resented every piece for being small. I boiled potatoes that had passed their prime and ate them with salt and apology. I put the ledger and the letters on the table and sat with them as if they could testify on my behalf. Toward evening, the clouds made a cathedral out of the western sky and then let it collapse into gold. The house took to light the way the old take compliments surprised and suspicious. I put a clean sheet on the bed in the spare room. Because doing something for a guest is a way to tell yourself a story about the kind of man you are. Night moved in, familiar as shame. I lit both lamps and the good candle Ruth had called company wax because she believed better light made better conversation. At 11, I shaved with a dull blade that punished vanity, and put on the clean shirt I had been saving for my own funeral. I tried out my face in the window and didn't like its answers. At 1:45, I stood by the door with my hand on the bolt, and made a bargain with God so old it had become a superstition. If he comes, I will listen. If he doesn't, I will learn to live with wind knocking like a son. When the first knock came, the house didn't flinch this time. 3 beats, measured like a man taking his time because he wants to get it right. I swallowed. The second set of knocks landed softer, the way you try again when you hope the first set didn't sound like someone else. I slid the bolt. The door stuck, as always, because wood remembers weather better than people do. I pulled, and it gave. Cold came in like a judgment. On the sill, a line of rain had made a careful lake. He didn't stand framed and ready for forgiveness, like a scene you rehearse. He stood off to the right, where the porch shadow is thickest. Hat in his hands. Not because it was polite, but because his hands needed something to do. I didn't speak. If I had, I would have said the wrong thing, and watched us both turn into our old selves to survive it. He stepped into the light as if it might roar. The face was a map I knew had been changed by time, and yet the roads were where I had left them. The scar under the eye from the time he had tried to teach the calf about fences. The mouth that sat hard when he didn't want to cry. The eyes that looked like Ruth's when she was deciding whether to forgive. "Pa," he said again. He was older than I had thought he was going to be. It made me furious at him for stealing that shock from me. "Jacob," I said. And the word gave me back 10 pounds of my own life. We just breathed at each other for a while. Then he shifted his weight and said, "I put a note in the barn. I didn't know if I read it," I said. "Come in before you drown on my porch." He shook his head. A small, stubborn tilt I recognized. "There's someone with me." He turned and half lifted a hand. From the dark stepped a smaller shape, the kind of shape that watches the world in case it needs to learn it later. A boy. 12, maybe. The boy's ears were too big for his head. He held them as if they might drop. "This is Eli," Jacob said. "I didn't name him after you, because that would have been rude without asking. The name came anyway." Names find their way, I said, and looked at the boy. He met my eyes as if he had been taught not to blink life away. Sir, he said. His voice had the respect of boys who have learned work early. My dad says I should say we're sorry to come so late. Midnights, when the truth arrives, I said, surprising us all. Can we? Jacob started, glancing past me into the house, as if it might not recognize him. Ruth would kill me if I left a boy out in the cold, I said, stepping aside. And she'd finish the job if I left you. We came in. The door closed behind us, with the unholy sound old wood makes when it remembers its vows. Inside, the house did what it had done when Daniel brought home a snake, and when the vet came to put down the dog. It made room, and pretended not to worry. In the light, the years on Jacob's face did what years do on a man. They admitted he had survived something, and not everything. He took off his coat. It was the old denim jacket from the tack room. The sleeves too short now, the pockets sagging like old promises. He touched the back of one chair but didn't sit. I thought you were dead, I said. Too even. He nodded, a small bow. Sometimes I thought so too. Then I'd be hungry again, and decide I wasn't. How long I started, then stopped because the question had too many teeth. Long, he said. Long enough to be wrong enough times to get tired of it. I should have come when he broke and swallowed and started again. I should have come then. I didn't. I was a man who could lift a car off a jack, but couldn't lift a phone. Phone would have rung in an empty kitchen, I said. You missed no mercy there. Eli's eyes moved from one of us to the other, as if he were following the ball in a game he wasn't sure he wanted to win. I poured tea that wouldn't heal anything, and pushed the best cup toward the boy. He took it with both hands, careful, and drank like it meant something to not cough. The clock limped toward 1. The house found a new kind of quiet, the kind that follows a first truth and waits for a second. Jacob put his hands on the table, palms down, as if the wood might rule in his favor. I came to say I was wrong, he said, and to say I want to work the land again, if there's land left that will have me. I came to say I named the boy after you, even when I didn't, and that was on purpose. I came to say I ain't asking you to be young with me, just to let me be old here when it's time. I came to say I'm sorry I made you into the man I said you were. Ruth's ribbon lay beside the letters like a small lit road. I put my hand on it, because you have to hold something when a storm arrives. Even when it's the kind you asked for. I came to say I was wrong. Too, I said. I was wrong. Loud. I was wrong with my hands. I was wrong with my silence. I should have said I was afraid to love a boy who could leave. Because I already knew how to bury things, and I didn't want to learn to bury you. I loved you like the barn loves a storm, wishing it would pass. That's not loving, that's hiding. I ain't good at apologies, so I'll give you work instead. He smiled a little. It was the smile he had at 10 when he found the missing wrench under his own foot. The boy looked between us, and then at the letters. Who's Ruth? He asked. Your grandma, I said. And the house exhaled like a man who had been underwater too long, and had finally remembered. Where the air is kept. We didn't fix 20 years in one night. We didn't try. We put wood on the fire and talked like men, who had built the same fence from opposite sides, and were surprised to meet at the middle. I told Eli about the hawk that lived in the locust, and how to tell the weather by the way the cows face. He told me he could start a fire in the rain, and I pretended to doubt a thing I wanted to see with my own eyes. Jacob said he had letters too, but that we didn't need them yet, because the mouths that wrote them were finally in the same room as the ears. They were meant for. When the clock finally clattered toward 2, the boy's head had found the warm geography of his crossed arms on the table, and his breath had gone to the soft tide of a body that trusts the roof. I stood, my knees remembering their job, and fetched a spare quilt. Jacob lifted his coat toward the peg, and then stopped, staring at the wall as if he saw through it. Pa, he said. Quiet. I didn't know if you'd keep the place after Ma. I told myself you'd sell. I told myself that so I could blame you, and not come. I almost sold. I said, then I didn't. The house said no when the man came with a measuring wheel. That's the truth I have. He nodded like a man hearing a sentence he'd already written, on a scrap of paper kept in his wallet for years. Thank you, he said. And in that thank you were cows and bills and fights, and Christmas mornings, and all the words we had wasted. I nodded back, because anything more would have broken something the boy was sleeping on. We put Eli in the spare room, and Jacob stood in the doorway a moment, his hand on the jamb, his mouth working as if it were trying on the shape of a prayer. I left him there. A man needs his own minutes with his sleeping child in a strange house. I went to the kitchen to wash 2 cups that didn't need it, and let the water run extra for the sound of it. When he came back, the lamps were low. He stopped at the mantel and touched the face-down photograph. He didn't turn it, He just put his fingers on the back like blessing a coffin. Tomorrow, he said, meaning both the picture and more. Tomorrow, I echoed. We sat a while longer with a kind of silence you don't have to break. Outside, the wind shifted to the north. The sky made that empty sound it makes when the clouds have decided they've done enough. The house breathed under us, old bones and old vows, and I thought, as my eyes closed where I sat, that if there were voices in the dust, they had finally said the only two things that matter. I am here, and I hear you. The next morning, I woke to the sound of laughter, small, quick, unguarded. For a moment, I thought it was a ghost memory from the past. The echo of the days when my son still ran barefoot through the wheat fields. But when I opened my eyes, the sound was real. It came from outside the window, where the frost was melting and sunlight spilled through the glass in weak, golden ribbons. Eli was outside with his father. The boy's voice rose in fragments. It still runs. Look, followed by the deep rumble of Jacob's laugh. The same laugh that used to shake the rafters when he was 17. For the first time in years, the sound didn't hurt. It healed. I sat up slowly, the stiffness in my back reminding me that time had not forgotten me, even if the world sometimes had. The house smelled like wood smoke and coffee. Someone, Jacob, I suspected, had lit the fire and warmed the kettle before sunrise. The floor creaked beneath my steps as I made my way to the kitchen. The table was full, 3 mugs, a loaf of bread, 2 apples, and a tin of butter I didn't own yesterday. It looked like family, for the first time in decades. The house didn't feel like it was waiting for something to end. Jacob appeared at the door, his sleeves rolled up, sawdust in his hair. "Good morning, Pa," he said quietly, almost shyly. "Morning," I replied, my voice rough with sleep and too much emotion. "You working already?" He nodded. "The fence by the east fields have. Figured I'd start before the weather changes." "You always did hate fences," I said, half smiling. "Yeah," he said softly, "but this one keeps the wind out." We ate in silence, broken only by the sound of spoons against mugs and the crackle of the fire. Eli came in with red cheeks and muddy boots, carrying a handful of dead leaves. "Look," he said proudly, "they're shaped like hearts." I took one from his palm. It was torn, fragile, its edges browned by frost. "Some hearts have to break before they fall," I said. The boy blinked, not understanding, and ran off to feed the cat that didn't live here anymore. Jacob watched me with that same steady calm Ruth used to have when she wanted me to say what I wouldn't. "He's a good kid," I said finally. "He's his mother's heart," Jacob replied, looking down. "She passed last winter." The words landed like snow, soft, but cold enough to burn. I wanted to reach out, to offer something. But what comfort can you give a man who's already buried half his world? I said only, "I'm sorry, son." He nodded once, and in that quiet acknowledgement, I could see all the years we'd lost learning how to speak again. The day passed in a rhythm I had forgotten. Tools on wood, boots on earth, wind through the open fields. We fixed the fence together. The 3 of us, me, my son, and the boy who carried both our tempers in miniature. Jacob worked like a man trying to rebuild not just a fence, but every broken piece of his life. Eli carried nails in a coffee tin and hummed tunelessly, occasionally looking up to see if we were proud, and I was. When the sun began to fall, Jacob leaned on the hammer and said, "It's strange. I thought this place would feel smaller after all this time." "It doesn't shrink," I said. "You just grew." He looked at me, really looked, and smiled faintly. "Maybe you did too." That night, the air grew heavy again, the kind of stillness that makes you listen for something you can't name. I couldn't sleep. The house was too alive now. Its silence no longer empty, but full of breathing and dreams. I got up, wrapped myself in my old coat, and lit the lantern from the mantel. Outside, the world was silver with frost. The sky stretched wide and indifferent, the moon spilling pale light across the barn roof. I walked to the porch, the boards groaning under me like they remembered the weight of other nights. The wind moved softly, pushing the fields in slow waves. Somewhere behind the barn, a fox barked a sharp, lonely sound, and then, faintly, came another noise. Not the cry of an animal, but a rustle, a shuffle. "Human, Jacob," I called. No answer. The sound came again, closer this time, near the edge of the field where the scarecrow still leaned, forgotten. I lifted the lantern and stepped down from the porch. The cold bit into my knees as I walked. My breath hung in clouds before me. Something glimmered at the base of the old oak tree, a metallic flicker, small but deliberate. I knelt, set the lantern down, and brushed the frost away. A small pocket knife, the one I had given Jacob as a boy. But this one wasn't old. It was clean, freshly polished, like it had been kept carefully, carried daily. My name was still carved into the handle, but beside it, newer, neater, another name. Eli. My heart stopped for a beat. Behind me, I heard footsteps in the dirt. Slow, careful. Jacob's voice. I turned. The lantern's light caught his face, pale and unreadable. I didn't mean to leave it, he said. Eli's been using it. I thought maybe he stopped when he saw my hands shaking. What's wrong? I handed him the knife. You kept it. He looked at it for a long moment. Yeah. I carried it every day after I left. Cut wood with it. Bread. Rope. Reminded me. There was still something sharp left in me that came from you. He tried to smile, but his voice cracked on the last word. We stood there under the tree, the lantern flickering between us, the air thick with everything we couldn't say. Then, from the house, Eli's voice. Dad. Grandpa. We turned at the same time. The boy stood on the porch, holding another lantern, its light trembling in his hands. I saw you were gone, he said. I was scared. Jacob walked to him, knelt down, and took the lantern. You don't need to be afraid, son, not anymore. Eli looked past him, to me. Grandpa. Yes. Can we stay here for a while? The words caught in my chest. Simple, honest, without calculation. The kind of question that could undo years of loneliness in a single breath. I walked toward them slowly, the frost crunching under my boots. I placed my hand on the boy's shoulder and nodded. You already are. We went back inside. The fire had burned low, but the embers were still alive. I added more wood, and the room filled with that deep orange glow that makes old houses feel young again. Eli sat cross-legged by the hearth, tracing shapes in the ash with a stick. Jacob sat opposite me at the table. We didn't talk much. Not yet. Words would come later, when silence had done its work. Finally, I said, you know, I thought this house was finished with me. Jacob looked up. And now, I stared at the fire, listening to the way it breathed. Now I think it was just waiting for all of us. He smiled. Ma would like that. Yeah, I said. She would. Outside, the wind shifted again, this time gentler. It carried no ghosts, no whispers, just the steady sigh of the earth turning toward morning. And for the first time in 20 years, I didn't dread what tomorrow might bring. It rained again that night, but softer this time, like the sky was breathing instead of weeping. I didn't sleep. Not really. The house had grown too full of warmth, too full of the sounds I'd forgotten it could make. The rustle of another pair of boots by the hearth, the faint laughter of a boy dreaming something good, the rhythmic creak of a floorboard under my son's steady pacing. The storm outside couldn't touch the one that was finally quiet inside. Got up when the first light pushed through the curtains, weak and hesitant. The fire was low, the coals pulsing in their sleep. I stirred them gently and added a few logs. Sparks leaped like tiny prayers, and the smell of burning oak filled the air, a smell I had loved all my life, because it always meant survival. Eli stirred first. He came stumbling from the spare room, his hair wild and his small feet slapping against the wood. Grandpa, he mumbled, you snore like thunder. I laughed, a sound that startled even me. Better thunder than silence. Boy, silence makes ghosts. He blinked, confused, then smiled the way only children can. Then I'm glad you're loud. Jacob appeared soon after, still half asleep. A man who had carried too many mornings alone. He nodded to me, that same silent understanding between men who have said enough the night before. He poured coffee, took a sip, grimaced. You still make it like tar, he said. You're free to improve it, I answered. But don't expect miracles. The pot's older than both of us. We ate quietly, bread, butter, and the last of the apples from the crate near the back door. The rain outside had turned to mist, soft and glowing in the early light. Eli pressed his face against the window, tracing invisible lines on the glass. It looks like the clouds are sleeping, he said. Jacob ruffled his hair. Even the sky gets tired sometimes. I looked at them, at the simple grace of their closeness, and something warm bloomed deep in my chest. The house had not seen this kind of morning in years. It had been waiting, patient, stubborn for laughter to wake it again. After breakfast, Jacob went to the barn to check the roof, and Eli followed him like a shadow. I stayed behind, clearing the table, humming a tune Ruth used to sing when she needed bread. It was half habit, half prayer. The sound lingered in the air, comforting and sad all at once. When I finished, I walked through the house the way I used to when I was younger, slow, deliberate, letting the boards tell me their secrets. The rooms were the same, but they looked different now. The dust no longer seemed like decay. It looked like the house had simply been waiting for someone to notice it still existed. In the hallway, a draft brushed past my arm, cold, thin, and deliberate. I turned. The door to the attic was slightly ajar. For a long time, I just stood there, the key heavy in my pocket. I had gone up there once before, days ago, when everything was still hollow. I had found the knife, the letters, the ghosts, but now the air felt different. The house wasn't warning me anymore. It was inviting me. I climbed the steps one by one, the old wood groaning in complaint. Dust swirled in the narrow beam of light that slipped through the window. The air smelled of old paper and rain that had found its way through forgotten cracks. At the far end, near the trunk where I had last found Ruth's letters, something new caught the light, a small glint of metal under a folded quilt. I knelt, brushing the fabric aside. There it was, a tiny brass box, one I hadn't seen in years. My wife's jewelry box. I remembered it well, how she'd kept her wedding ring. Thereafter her hands had grown too thin for gold. How she'd hide little notes for the boys between the folds of linen. I hesitated. Then I opened it. Inside lay a single piece of paper, folded carefully, yellowed with age. My heart began to thump the way it used to when the doctor read results, or when I'd forgotten an anniversary. On the outside, in her delicate handwriting, were 2 words: for Elijah. I sat back on my heels. The air around me seemed to stop. The only sound was the ticking of my pulse in my ears. I unfolded the note. My love, if you ever find this, it means the house finally spoke to you again. I've hidden it where I know you'd come only when your heart softened. Where the past still breathes. You and Jacob both carry the same fire. You burn for what you love, and you destroy what you fear. But I never doubted that the same flame that tore this family apart would one day light its way home again. I know what happened that night. He didn't drive him away. He left because he thought he wasn't enough. You told him to go because you thought you weren't worthy of being forgiven. But forgiveness was never something you had to earn from each other. It was something I prayed you would learn to give yourselves. If he comes back, don't ask him where he's been. Ask him if he's hungry. And if he's with a child, love that child twice for both the father and the son. You built this house with your hands. Let it heal you now. Ruth. By the time I reached the end, my hands were trembling. I pressed the letter to my lips and let the tears fall freely. For 20 years, I'd carried the weight of a curse that wasn't real. The storm had never been punishment. It had been waiting for me to open this note. To listen to her voice one last time. Below me. Through the floorboards, I could hear faint laughter again. Eli's voice. Jacob's too. The sound rose up like sunlight through cracks in the clouds. Grandpa. Eli's voice called faintly. Are you up there? I wiped my eyes quickly. Yes, boy. I'm here. Dad says lunch is ready. I'll be right down, I said. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it into my shirt pocket, close to my heart. The attic light had changed now. It wasn't the pale, cold gray of morning. It was warm, soft, golden, Ruth's kind of light. When I came down, Jacob was setting plates on the table, and Eli was pouring milk with the concentration of a scientist discovering gravity. They looked up when I entered. Find anything interesting up there? Jacob asked casually. I met his eyes and smiled, a real smile this time. The kind that came from the place Ruth's letter had just unlocked. Yes, I said. I found your mother. He blinked, unsure whether to laugh or cry. In the attic, in the way she always is, I said. Everywhere you thought she'd gone. He nodded slowly, understanding more than I expected. We ate together, the 3 of us. The rain softened outside, turning to mist again. When Eli dropped his fork, Jacob scolded him gently, then winked at me, like we were both remembering when I used to do the same to him. After lunch, we went to the porch. The clouds had begun to break apart, letting long spears of sunlight stretch across the fields. The ground was wet, but the air smelled of promise. Eli ran ahead, chasing the puddles, his laughter echoing through the yard. Jacob leaned against the post beside me, his hands in his pockets. It feels different here now, he said. It's not the house that changed, I said. It's us. He looked at me, and for the first time since that terrible night 20 years ago, I saw the boy he had been, the one who had drawn tractors with wings, and believed the world could fly if you only built it right. That evening, as the sun fell, I took Ruth's letter to the mantel and set it beside her photograph. The glass caught the firelight and seemed to shimmer. Eli came up beside me, quiet for once. Was she nice? He asked softly. The nicest person God ever made, I said, and the only one who could tell me when I was wrong, and make me thank her for it. He smiled. I think you miss her. I do, I said, but not like before. Now I just talk to her, and she listens. He thought about that for a while. Do you think she can see us? I put my arm around his small shoulders and pulled him close. If she couldn't before, I said, She can now. Outside, the lantern on the porch flickered to life with the wind. I watched it sway gently, its light steady even as the air moved around it. The farmhouse no longer looked abandoned. It looked alive. Every creak, every whisper of the wind through the rafters, every flicker of light, it all felt like her. Like Ruth was still here, just on the other side of the rain. The night came quietly, the way forgiveness does without thunder or warning. The fields outside had turned silver again, wrapped in moonlight and dew. The air was still, save for the faint hum of crickets and the steady tick of the clock on the mantel. Inside, the farmhouse breathed with a calm it hadn't known in years. Jacob and Eli had gone to bed early. Their laughter had faded through the hallway like a hymn, and I had stayed by the fire, unwilling to let the day end. Ruth's letter rested on the mantel beside her photograph, the flame's reflection flickering in the glass. I sat there for a long time, listening. It was a habit I'd learned from solitude, waiting for the house to speak. But tonight, it said nothing. It was content. That, in itself, was a miracle. Then, just as the clock struck 12, came the sound I'd come to both dread and crave. 3 slow knocks. My body went still. 3, just like before. Measured.com. A visitor who knew what they wanted. For a moment, I thought it was the wind playing tricks, but the echo that followed was too deliberate, too human. I rose from the chair, my knees groaning in protest, and turned toward the door. The lamp's glow stretched across the floorboards, trembling slightly with my heartbeat. Behind me, Jacob's voice came low from the hallway. Pa. He stood there, barefoot, holding Eli by the shoulder. The boy rubbed his eyes, confused. Who is it? Jacob asked. I didn't answer. I already knew. Or maybe I just hoped. The knocks came again. I opened the door. A woman stood in the doorway, shrouded in a gray shawl. The moonlight behind her made her look almost spectral at first. Thin, soaked from the drizzle. But her face was soft, alive. Her eyes found mine immediately, steady and knowing. I'm sorry to come so late, she said. Her voice was tired, but kind. My name is Anna. She looked past me, toward Jacob, then back. I believe you knew my mother. The words struck something deep. Your mother? I asked. She nodded. Ruth. The room fell utterly still. Jacob stepped forward, his face pale. What did you just say? She was my mother too, Anna said. Her hands trembled as she reached into her shawl and pulled out a folded envelope. I've been looking for this house for years. My breath hitched. I motioned her inside. Come, girl. Don't stand in the cold. She sat by the fire, her shawl steaming as the heat thawed the rain from her shoulders. Up close, I could see her clearly, her hair streaked with silver, her eyes the same deep brown as Ruth's. But what undid me most was her smile. The same small, patient smile that used to meet me every morning at the kitchen door. Jacob stood frozen near the wall, his face a storm of confusion. You're saying, he began, voice shaking. You're saying Ma had another child? Anna nodded. Before she met your father, she was young, barely 17. She was sent away for a time, to a convent near the border. They made her give me up. One found her name years later in adoption records. But by then, she was gone. Her gaze fell to the letter she held. I found this in the archives. It had your address. She wrote it to you both, but I don't think it was ever sent. My hands trembled as I took the envelope. The handwriting was Ruth's, unmistakably hers. My throat tightened. She must have written it before we married, I whispered. Jacob sat down heavily. All these years, she carried that secret. Anna nodded. And she carried you both in her heart. Always. I opened the letter. Ruth's voice came back to me, alive in ink and breath. My dear Elijah, if this ever reaches you, it will mean I've made peace with what I could not change. Before I was your wife, I was a mother to a daughter I could not keep. Her name is Anna. I pray she grows up kind, even without me. When I met you, I was still half a ghost, loving with one hand, holding grief with the other. You gave me a home. You gave me laughter again. But I never stopped listening for the sound of the child I lost. If she ever finds her way to our door, promise me one thing. Open it. Don't ask where she's been. Just let her in. Ruth. Asterisk, asterisk. When I finished, the silence was unbearable. The fire snapped once, and that sound alone kept us from drowning in it. I looked at Anna, at the stranger who wasn't a stranger at all. You found your way, I said quietly. She nodded, tears glistening. And I found her in every corner of this house. Jacob's eyes softened. He stood and crossed the room slowly. If she was Ma's, she's ours too, he said, voice thick. He reached out a hand. Welcome home. Anna hesitated only a heartbeat before taking it. Eli, wide-eyed, looked between them. Does that mean I have another aunt? Jacob smiled faintly. It means the family just got bigger. Son. We sat together long into the night. Anna told us stories Ruth had left behind in the letters about her laughter, her small rebellions, her habit of singing while she cooked, things even I had forgotten. It was like Ruth had returned through her daughter's voice, stitching herself back into our lives, one memory at a time. At some point, Jacob fetched his guitar from the corner. It hadn't been played since his teenage years. He strummed softly, the strings humming with a rusty tenderness. Eli leaned against his father's shoulder, half asleep. Anna sat across from me, eyes shining in the firelight. The farmhouse glowed. It no longer looked like a place of loss, but of return. When the clock neared 1, the fire had dwindled to embers. Anna rose to leave, but I stopped her. "You'll stay here tonight," I said firmly. "There's a room upstairs that's waited long enough." She smiled. "Thank you. I think she'd like that." Before she went, she turned to the mantel and laid one hand gently on Ruth's photograph. "I think she led me here," she whispered. I believed her. Later, when the others were asleep, I stepped onto the porch. The rain had stopped, and the stars had come out sharp and countless, as if the heavens themselves were watching. The lantern beside the door flickered, its flame small but steady. For the first time in 2 decades, I wasn't afraid of the quiet. It no longer sounded empty. It sounded full of Ruth, of Jacob, of Eli's laughter, of Anna's voice telling the truth that had waited too long. I took Ruth's letter from my pocket and held it up to the moonlight. "You were right," I said softly. I opened the door. The wind stirred gently, brushing my cheek like a familiar hand. When I went back inside, I paused at the doorway to the kitchen. The table was cluttered with cups, letters, and the kind of mess that only families make, and I smiled. Because finally, after all the storms, all the silences, all the lost years, the house was full again. The seasons turned, as they always do. Spring brought green to the dead fields. Summer brought laughter to the porch. Autumn brought stories, retold until Eli could recite them by heart. And winter, that cruel, silent winter that had once taken everything, brought peace. The farmhouse never grew quiet again. Not truly, because even in the stillness, it breathed with life, with memory, forgiveness, and the stubborn kind of love that refuses to die. And when the wind passed through the cracks and whispered through the rafters, it didn't sound like loneliness anymore. It sounded like Ruth, still singing, still home.